Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 23, Episode 24. Coming up on the show, we've got snowstorm doppelgangers, Tibetan zombie porters, and treasure maps to spirit doubloons. I'm Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
I'm intrigued by the spirit doubloons, but what's with the zombies?
Well, Tibetans, the lamas, had specific powers that could raise the dead.
Really?
Yeah, you could raise the dead. You could have a zombie. And what's so amazing about it is it's almost identical to not only Western zombie lore, like the stuff that's in all the the movies.
Yeah.
But it's got the same elements from the Haitian zombie lore as well. Like you raise the dead to essentially help you carry your bags of stuff over the mountains.
Oh,
it's very
wow.
slow because you got to wait for them.
But I thought with Haitian zombies that a lot of it actually related to not the actual reanimation of a corpse, but I mean, that's the law, but it was the utilization of some type of substance that would cause people to go into like a stupor.
It was like a poison that made them seem as if they were dead.
Yeah.
And then the voodoo master would essentially dig them up, knowing that they didn't really die, but then keep them in this drugged state and use them as kind of a slave.
Yeah. Is this what the Tibetans were doing, or is it a little bit more esoteric than that?
We don't know. I just came across a bunch of tales of these lamas who essentially had this weird porter in tow, and everyone was like, what's wrong with your assistant? He seems kind of out of it. And the lama would just say, oh no, he died like a couple of weeks back. But I'm just using his corpse to carry my suitcase.
It's Tibetan Weekend at Bernie's.
Basically, yeah.
That would have been a better headline.
And this zombie porter is yak butter, like following the Tibetan master up the mountain with all these packs on his back.
Great.
It's really strange.
Looking forward to that. Well, in the Plus extension, we're going to be going into toxic prayer, of all things. And it's not necessarily prayer in relation to religious prayer, although they can involve that. It's more about the power and the negative influence of toxic intention. I know that sounds kind of very airy-fairy, but I've got all these scientific, anecdotal reports as well of people that have tried to do positive things for people through prayer, like just praying to any deity and just having good intentions and sending thoughts and prayers that ends up wrecking people's lives.
How is that toxic, though? You just mean the results are toxic?
It's the results are toxic, yeah. I mean, of course, there are toxic prayers and intentions where you try and curse people, you try and hex people, but for the most part, that seems to come back on the person who's sending out the negativity. So we're going to go into that, as well as I'm going to touch on a little bit of zombies, because I went into this crazy story about the Nazis attempting to create their own zombies as a slave race that came from this forbidden book, which I spent all day searching for. And I don't give it away because I will tell you the story about it in the Plus extension.
Well,
Let's just say I'm angry.
I'll give you some clues. When you hear Aaron screaming obscenities from the office upstairs at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, when you're scheduled to record at 5, that's when you know it's going to be a great show.
By the way, it's now 8 p.m. So that
the last time I heard you swear like that was when we were about to go to lunch and you said, hang on, I just got to go to the bathroom. And then you went, what what the fuck? And you come out of the bathroom and you've just got
your fault.
A massive wet patch on your crotch.
Oh, yeah, well. So I thought, the tap that we have in the sink, for some reason, it's like, depending on where it's pointing, it has a higher flow rate.
Oh, yeah, it's all about the tap.
And it had been moved.
Yeah, sure.
And so I turned it on, and of course it came on full ball, and I went flying down into the sink, it came flying out all over my pants. I looked like I'd pissed myself.
Yeah,
like,
that's why I never use that tap, by the way.
Okay, well then, all right, enough of peeing yourself stories. Let's get into what you've got.
Well, my week started with this book from Audrey Irvin because she had an article in the latest issue of Edge Science.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a really fascinating researcher. She's a psychologist. She runs like a neurofeedback practice in the States somewhere, I believe. But she's written this book on the frameworks for understanding extraordinary human experience. And she's really trying to investigate supernormal abilities and see how they compare across cultures. Because we know that no matter where you are in the world, whether you're looking at shamanism in the Americas or if you're looking at Tibetan Buddhism, for example, or the stories of the saints from Christianity, Jesus performing miracles, every religion, every tradition has someone
similar themes
performing miracles or doing some kind of supernormal, having some kind of supernormal ability. And she wanted to look across these cultures and essentially tackle questions like, are there common abilities found across cultures and in different places in the world? Are similar methods used to bring about these abilities, to evoke extraordinary abilities? And what can we learn from the states of consciousness from which they emerge? And in the introduction, she writes that these extraordinary experiences, of course, they occur across all lifespans. But in her research, she found, as we've found on the show, they often begin in childhood.
Yeah.
They start around the age of 2 or 3. She said there's a flurry of psychic activity that occurs around puberty. Some children report seeing lights around people or objects. There's all sorts of experiences, as we've covered. Some children say they sense what other people are thinking or feeling. Others see fairies, ghosts, or angels. Others remember the future, seeing future events unfold while they're awake or dreaming. Out-of-body experiences are reported. And some young children might actually remember past lives in incredible detail. And in the intro, she says, this is something I've had personal experience with. And she said that one afternoon, as her children were playing in the family room, her 2.5-year-old daughter crawled into her lap and she was clearly upset. She was crying and really distraught. And her 2-year-old said, Mummy, the men are coming, we're running, the men are coming. And she became engrossed in this story and got this faraway look in her young eyes. And, Audrey said it was like she was no longer in my arms. She was somewhere else. And she said she was just confused and stunned. She'd never seen her daughter act like this before. She'd never seen this look on her face or heard her use even this kind of language. And she just kept on saying, Mummy, where is my mummy? I can't find my mummy. And of course she says to her daughter, no, darling, I'm right here. Everything's okay. I'm right here. But she wasn't the right mummy. Her daughter was looking for her other mum.
So is it like another life is coming through, like a previous life memory?
Well, she said, I felt grieved. I felt helpless. My daughter was terrified. She said, I'm running. I'm hiding. It's so cold. Where is my mummy? And over the next few days, Audrey said she would return to this episode. It was always spontaneous. You couldn't prompt her. It would just come out of nowhere. And each time she would become inwardly focused and clearly distraught. And Audrey said, I finally sat down with her and we started to draw a picture. And she said she showed me where her house was and where she ran with her mother when the men invaded. Somewhere along the way, her mother had fallen. My daughter had run to hide at a nearby lake and possibly drowned there. Now, she said after doing this reenactment, after drawing the pictures and explaining everything and having her daughter go through the whole sequence, she calmed down and never experienced the flashbacks, I presume, never experienced them again. They just completely went away. So, what a kind of driving experience to have you look at these weird abilities that children seem to display. But she goes beyond kids and just starts looking at a whole bunch of things. It's a real kind of academic approach. It's a little bit different to the usual storytelling, the hot, scolding chaff that we love on this show.
No, well, sometimes it's good to balance it out nicely.
I should actually mention today's the last episode of the season. Forgot to mention that at the start of the show. We're coming back on June the 30th.
That's an odd place to mention it, but yeah. Of course.
Why not? I'm just going to jump in here and let you know because I'll forget at the end of the show. And
I
then
probably would too.
People will wonder where the show is next week.
Yep.
But yeah, this is the last episode of the season. This is the end of season 24 today. We'll be back on the 3rd of July for our regular Barnacles, our free listeners.
Do we have to?
Well, not really, but we may as well.
Fine.
And on the 30th of June, we'll be back for our Plus season. So if you sign up for Plus, you'll get us before the 3rd of July. Now that I'm thinking about it, why didn't we take our week off to coincide with the 4th of July? That would have made total sense. But instead, we're coming back for the 4th of July.
Oh, well, that's fun. Makes it easy. We can celebrate.
Why did we do that? Okay, so yeah, last episode of the season before I forget. And we're taking a week off. We'll be back after that. But essentially, I couldn't dig too far into Audrey's book, Infinite Possibility, because of that academic slant. She does have some really fascinating stuff that led me in other directions, though. She looks at shamans in the early chapters and particularly their ability to control the elements. She talks about the Kung of the Kalahari and how they can pick up hot coals with their hands. Not everyone, just the shamans. And she then compares this with Korean shaman who can swallow live coals and smoke 4 cigarettes at once in reverse. Which I thought was a really weird example. Like, you got all these examples of, shamans running through flames, but the Korean shaman, who are usually women, they can smoke 4 cigarettes backwards. How does that even work?
I've done that when I was drunk, but apart from that, no, it's a superhuman ability.
In some cases, shaman can evoke the spirit of fire by pointing at the earth and emitting flames from their mouth or nose or whole bodies, for example.
That's better.
That's a bit more impressive. She mentions Teb Tengri, the magician who conferred the title of Genghis Khan on the great Mongol emperor. He's supposed to have possessed immunity to extreme temperatures. So in the frigid cold, it was said that Teb Tengri would run naked through the desert and could sit down on ice-frozen rivers, and he would basically melt the ice around him from the heat, with the heat from his body. Steam was said to rise about him as the ice melted, which is similar to the Tummo meditation from Tibetan Buddhism. The Alagiri Buryats of eastern Mongolia recount that their shaman had 70 loads of hay brought down, sat into the middle of a field, and his assistants set them all on fire. The hay burned until none was left, and then he climbed in, their head shaman climbed in, and sat amongst the flames. When everything was all burnt out, he climbed out of the ashes unharmed, like Game of Thrones style. And then there's the Luiseno of Southern California. They kind of did the same thing for their shamans who had this ability. They would build fires as large as a house, and the old shamans would basically jump in. It's kind of like how Swedes jump into an ice bath. Mm-hmm. These shaman would just jump into a roaring bonfire and kind of, wash off the dirt of the day.
Yeah, well, what is the purpose of it, though? Is it for spiritual cleansing? Is it to show off, which I wouldn't think that's what they would want to do? Why do it?
I don't know. Maybe demonstrate their powers or test themselves, maybe?
Normally, from what I've been reading today about this kind of idea about shamanism, is you don't want to show off you have these abilities, especially in curses as well. If you're a witch doctor or if you are able to engage in hexing, you don't want people to actually know that you can do it, which obviously cancels out this idea of it being some type of, placebo effect or nocebo effect.
Well, this isn't normally the case because the shaman is considered the medicine person, the holy person of the tribe, and they're
maybe it's a way to retain. Maybe
I think you're talking more about dueling wizards.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, but still, it's still kind of the same thing. Like, why do you want to show it off? I thought it would be something that is sacred and kept secret and hidden away.
Not for these guys. They just want it all to burn.
Yeah.
And it's funny how she kind of compares miraculous abilities like not being able to be affected by roaring flames with, again, just what seemed like parlor tricks. Like in the very next line, she says, Eskimo shaman are also said to be able to grow a beard in seconds.
Yeah, that deserved that sound effect.
Wow. They can also make a severed cord whole by putting it in their mouths.
Come on.
Some of them, no, that's it.
Oh.
They're basically party tricks. Shaman have also been known to alter their bodies in a variety of other ways, and she lists through, North American Penobscots who would flee from their enemies and make themselves invisible. They could lift thick pieces of ice, walk through solid obstacles, and cause their own bodies to shrink or grow. Shaman have even been known to leave footprints in solid rock or disappear into the earth up to their waist, or even disappear entirely. So this is interesting because a lot of this stuff that I was coming across in these early chapters, specifically on shamanism, I later on in my research this week would find direct examples in Tibetan Buddhism.
Right, okay.
Putting a prints in solid rock is one that kept coming up. And you'll actually find examples of this across cultures all over the world, whether it's in Europe or Asia, where there'll be a handprint in solid, hard stone. And there's usually a legend associated with it that a holy person, a shaman or a saint or a lama just leant against there one day. And something about their body, something about their energy made them start sinking into the rock.
Wow.
It's really strange.
Yeah, it is.
And it kind of ties in with the UFO topic as well, because we have a bunch of eyewitness accounts of sources of craft going inside rock, going into the ground.
Many.
Being half submerged. Like people think, the eyewitness thinks, oh my gosh, it's going to crash and this craft will just disappear into the earth. It seems to be related. The shaman of the Micmac used to dance in a circle until their feet sank into the ground. One of the Micmac shamans stamped so hard when he was angry that his footprints remain permanently in the stone. So again, a bunch of stories like this. And I pointed out that a lot of these correlate with Tibetan Buddhism stuff.
Yeah.
Like Tumo, as I said, was the meditation to enhance the inner fire, to burn the snow around you. Lungom is another one we've spoken about in the past. Remember?
That's long running, isn't it?
Yeah, the story from Alexandra David Neal when she was in Tibet. She reported seeing a Lungom runner, and her account was that it was just a speck in the distance, just this little dot, like black dot on the horizon on a clear day. And it was getting closer. And as it's getting closer, she realizes it's a monk, and he's just running at an incredible speed, like he's going hundreds of miles an hour. And the locals she was with said, "Oh, this is a Lungom runner, and be careful because if you try and stop him, he'll die because he's going that fast. It's like trying to stop a moving train." But when he went past, she said, "Yeah, he was going so fast, but you could see he had this focus in his eye. He was just staring ahead like he was in a trance. But his steps were like someone on the moon, like an astronaut. Not the same speed, but each leap was like a gummy bear bounce."
I was reading about something similar to that today, and I couldn't find the exact details, but I was looking for more of this Tibetan occultist kind of, stories and experiences that people had. And there was this traveler that had this incredible story about something similar. It wasn't described as Lungom, but it was essentially that they had been in this one particular village, and this traveler had left, and it was in the afternoon, and it was like going into dusk. So it was in the afternoon, and this traveler had left, and basically he was like a communications, kind of like a messenger between different towns. And so this traveler gets to this next town, and somehow the person had arrived that morning. This is a strange thing. The messenger had actually arrived that morning, which means that the messenger had actually gone back in time, had arrived before they even left.
I haven't heard that one.
Isn't it crazy? And of course, the foreign traveler was like, "What the hell is going on?" Whereas to the Tibetans, it was just like, "Yeah, that's normal. That happens all the time." Like it was just readily accepted that that's just what happens.
I've got a bunch of messenger stories coming up that are super weird like that. But she goes through the usual stuff we've heard, like emitting light when they pass away. Like we've covered that on the show, the rainbow body.
Yeah.
Where the lamas kind of know when they're going to die. In the stuff I've got coming up, there's a bunch of almost humorous stories where the lama will basically prepare for his death but not tell anyone, and he knows precisely when it's going to happen. But he'll get all these young disciples together and he'll say, "Let's go through some of the chants, and we'll go through the chants together." And they'll say, "Okay, master," and they'll all kind of sit together and go through these, scriptures and chant the scriptures. But he'll kind of interrupt them and start chanting one line over and over. And the line will be something like, sever all attachments and leave the human world behind, or something like that. And he'll repeat it over and over again. Like on the third repeat, he'll just kind of breathe out and with a big smile on his face, just die. Like sitting upright, perfectly straight back, big grin on his face, serene look in his eyes, like eyes wide open, but just dead. It's almost as if he's like, and then just passes away.
Yeah, because is it like achieving, it's not enlightenment, but it's kind of like moving to that next level.
He's just conscious of when he's going to go, and then setting up his disciples to kind of witness it.
Yeah.
So there's some odd examples like that. But then there's also saints from the history, like Guru Tantepa was one of them. He meditated for 12 years, and his daughter-in-law discovered him emitting quote, "a great lamp-like effulgence surrounded by 15 girls holding dishes of fine food." So this is like this weird beam of light coming out, and inside this mystical beam of light is all these like air stewardesses holding canapes.
But what? It's like, what's with all the flash?
That, I don't know. Isn't that cool? Like,
I mean, it is cool, but again,
I would like canapes at my funeral, and attractive women holding them.
It's just all very flashy. It just goes in. I don't know. It's almost like a paradox.
But he didn't actually die. When he finally emerged from his hut, his body had been transformed into a 16-year-old boy's, and he just went on and lived his life, grew old again, and then died later. That's the perfect way to go. is to not go at all,
Then come
have a
back
bunch
as
of
a
hot
16-year-old.
women with canapes, transform into a 16-year-old boy, and then just continue on.
We all
That's a
want to
good
know
way to die.
what happened to the canapes.
They were delicious. There's stories of the power over nature. Raising the dead comes up, but I'll mention that later. There's
See, the power of a nature stuff, though, is fascinating. And I'm not entirely sure if it's the same with Tibet, but I was reading today about some of the... Actually, no, it was Tibetan. I'm sorry. It was Tibetan, where... Because there's two forms of controlling the weather. One is by actually utilizing like a thought form to be able to influence. It's not a physical form. It's basically this thought form that manifests as an energetic force to be able to influence, I guess, weather patterns. But the other thing is that you basically do certain practices to grab hold of a spirit that's around, and then you utilize that spirit to control the weather for you. So it's, it's almost like a little bit of a trick. You're getting the spirit to do the work for you, but it's looking like you're the one that's actually doing it.
That's where a lot of this stuff ties in with shamanism, because shamanism was all about connecting with the spirits, getting the spirits to do your bidding, communicating with that world, crossing over into that world, venturing into that world. But again, as we go through these powers over nature, it's funny how Audrey does this in the book, is she has this incredible example and follows it up with a party trick. So one example is Upagutta, which must have been an Indian, like an early Indian practitioner, who was said to be able to put his hand over the sun, right? Just hold it up, like blocking his eyes from the sun. But it would essentially create an eclipse over the entire village.
That's cool.
Like the whole village its light would be blocked out in some way. It was really bizarre. But then she follows it up with another, saint from history, Can Harper, who was said to be able to pluck a lychee from a tree with his gaze.
Yeah, that needed that. Again, like these incredible feats, these amazing astronomical feats, and then yet you're like, here's a lychee for you.
That's one day I want to be in one of these history books with incredible powers. It's like Grundy. He could open a can of Pringles with a single thought. He could serve up a bag of Doritos at will.
It just makes me wonder, though, is like these stories, like they're folkloric, aren't they? They're not coming from, like, where are they coming from? Are they
from historical accounts of eyewitnesses?
But from how far back? Because I'm wondering if
thousands of years.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's probably older times where people were just like, oh my God, that's incredible. But like, meanwhile, it's just sleight of hand.
Dude, it would be incredible if all of a sudden I said, do you want a Pringle? And it just pops open.
Yeah, I would be, but I would be impressed.
I can't do anything else. That's my only ability. It's the only thing. Like I've meditated.
Years of meditation.
I left society and meditated. I left my family behind. I left all material possessions behind, became poor and just lived in a cave for 50 years. I come out, I'm skinny, got a massive beard. I smell weird. I look weird. It's like 2050. Everything's strange.
By the way, Pringles have been out of business for the last 30 years.
Yeah, but I can open them. I can open a can.
No, all the cans are gone. That's it. All those years of research and meditation.
There's a story of Gamtiapa, who could stomp on the earth and then water would spring out from a fissure on the ground. Like he could just find a well by stamping. But then there's other stories of practitioners who had that skill, but then they'd accidentally flood the village. So it's kind of like there's warnings about not being able to control your powers.
Yeah.
And then there's all sort of stories that cross over with the law from the West, the religions from the West, like Moses parting the Red Sea. Yeah. You have the Virupa, the river goddess, was approached by Ganja Devi, one of these early Buddhist monks, who essentially asked the water goddess for something to drink. And she said no. So he parted the entire river, walked across, and then, flipped her off and walked away. But again, there's stories of being able to part massive bodies of water and pass through. But of course, there's always telepathy, there's levitation, there's out-of-body experiences. The list goes on by location when you're talking about the stories from especially Tibet. But I wanted to specifically look at Turton and the Terma. Now, the Turton, they're treasure hunters. They're
You mean spiritual or actual treasure?
Yeah, like they're actual treasure and spiritual treasure.
Okay.
And the Turton is like a title that's conferred to an accomplished, spiritual practitioner who has the ability to find spiritual treasures. The spiritual treasures are known as terma. Now, a terma can be like an actual text, like a lost scroll or some kind of scripture, or it can be some kind of sacred object like a dagger or a ring or a stone. And essentially, they're found by these Tibetan. They might be revealed in a vision. And she says there's several types. She splits it into two categories, but I think there's actually more from my research later today. There was the earth terma, which includes sacred objects. There can be images, even photographs, or, for example, a hidden valley suitable for retreat, or maybe a place to escape from a dangerous political situation. Certain Himalayan states and communities were supposed to have been started through designation by a Tibetan, by one of these treasure hunters. So, they might get a vision of this is where we're going to establish a monastery. Right. Everyone kind of follows the guy up some mountain pass into this hidden valley. And he's like, well, I got this vision. This is where we need to build. Earth terma is most often these sacred texts which appear miraculously. One example is the story of how apparently Buddhism came to Tibet, because Tibet was always the Bon shamanism, right? But one of the early stories is that the king, in his huge palace, one day these three scriptures, these three scrolls came from the sky and essentially landed on the roof of his palace. And they contained like the Buddhist teachings, the teachings of Buddha, like the scriptures. The only problem is no one could read them. And
so they're interpreted?
The history of the Buddhism in the country is that these scrolls just sat around for years. And everyone was like, I don't know. I'm sure there's a good story in there. But no one could read them. And it took hundreds of years before someone came from India and basically pointed out, let me translate this for you.
But now it makes me question, did he actually translate it? Was he more like, it says this? And then, whatever.
It's basically a story about this guy, sits under a tree. He finds out a bunch of stuff,
Now create an entire worldwide religion out of it.
But the story was, and this is similar to, the tales in the West of the Holy Grail passing between different locations, and the early Knights of the Round Table setting up harmonic locations for churches, and Glastonbury and all that harmonic grid layout of Glastonbury, and the whole countryside kind of exploding in fruits, and everything grows amazingly, and the water becomes crystal clear, and there's suddenly all this game and animals, and everything's amazing. It's the same idea with these scriptures coming down. Apparently this caused like a golden age. Even though they couldn't read them, they were emitting some kind of power
intention
that changed the landscape. Yep. There was something embedded in them that was powerful. And it's the same kind of story where crops suddenly grow amazingly well. It's the same of the temple at Jerusalem. The rivers running from there would make fruit trees grow. It's all the same stuff all over the world.
It is fascinating that you've got these different cultures, that have very similar themes in their stories. It kind of comes back again to that idea of there being like a pre-existing civilization. Yeah. And they've obviously broken up, and then now those folkloric tales have kind of spread throughout other religions and other cultures.
Well, it's funny, how I actually got into this stuff today was because we were reading the new book Exogenesis from Bruce Fenton.
Yes.
And Bruce mentioned one of these terma or treasure stories, and his interpretation of the story, which I'll actually tell you in a moment, was that it was some kind of alien technology. It wasn't necessarily an ancient artifact. It was something from, it would be ancient, but it was something from an alien civilization, and it had some kind of embedded technology inside it.
Was this because, I can't recall if it was the exact story, but it was something exploded in the atmosphere, and when it came flying down, it was like crystalline?
No, different
one? Right.
I'll tell the story in a moment. But I could see why he would make that argument. I didn't agree with his take, and I'll explain why in a moment. But there were other examples where you kind of thought, it kind of does sound like a technology. Like the terma, for example, the hidden treasures that only the Tibetans, the treasure finders, could reveal. Some of them, how it says you would sometimes find a scroll and it would have this lost information on it. Sometimes it was written in a script that no one could read. They called it the Dakini script. And a Dakini is like a female heavenly spirit. and then across all kind of cultures in the East, this Dakini heavenly spirit. And it was said to be this Dakini script. No one could read it except for a few people who could only read it after some kind of secret alchemical process. So there's a story I came across, very late in the day today, where one of these Tibetan Lama treasure hunters found one of these Dakini scripts. And they don't describe what it looks like, but it's not like Tibetan. And this is why you might presume it's some kind of alien script. Like no one knows what it is. But through some kind of process that's almost been lost to time, and they detail it, it involves using certain chemicals and a certain alchemical procedure to submerge the particular paper that's it's written on in like a dark room, almost like you're in a photo lab.
Yeah.
And over a period of hours, the paper isn't damaged, but something happens. And the person who knows this process will sometimes be able to see the information that's contained in the script, but it'll kind of appear to them as if it's projected off the paper, like up into the air. And the way it's described as working is...
You mean like a holographic kind of projection?
Yes. And the way it's described is you might have this Dakini script, this alien script that no one understands. And it might be, say, I don't know, maybe 50 characters long. It's very small. But when this alchemical process is completed and the information is projected out, it produces hundreds of pages of information. So it's almost like a compression algorithm. It's like this.
So I can see why you would make the argument that it's some type of alien technology.
Yeah, I mean, if you're purely thinking in materialist ways, then you would obviously jump to the conclusion that, oh yeah, it is some kind of compression algorithm. It's some kind of technology. I'll get to that in a moment and why I don't necessarily go to that conclusion. But I started looking for more references to this idea of these hidden treasures, these terma. And so let's go into that reference that was from Bruce Fenton's book, Exogenesis. It actually comes from a book by a Tibetan Lama named Chokyal Namkhai Norbu.
Well done.
Dude, these Tibetan names.
Honestly, you did better than I did. I would have just butchered that.
They're so hard because sometimes...
Well, you need to have the dialect as well.
The D's are silent and then other times the H is silent, and I don't understand the rules of pronunciation. But this author was born in Tibet in the 1930s. He eventually was initiated in the Dzogchen practice. And it's funny, when you look up what the Dzogchen practice is described as, it's often, he calls it himself, the turbo path to liberation. So,
as in enlightenment, liberation, enlightenment?
Yeah. So essentially, it would take many lifetimes to achieve enlightenment in the traditional practices of Tibetan Buddhism. But then someone figured out Dzogchen, and it's the turbo path. So you're just like, and you can apparently achieve that goal in one lifetime.
I don't think anyone really wants that, though, because that would be pretty intense.
Oh, yeah, it's intense.
You talk about, sitting up in a cave for 50 years. It's going to be a lot worse than that.
I'll explain it a bit in a moment, but part of it is literally fighting demons, which is what accelerates the path, apparently. But he shares his childhood experiences. It's a fantastic book. He remembers being 3 or 4 years old. His earliest memories were happily playing with his family and all of a sudden being surrounded by these strangers. Like a gaggle of strange men suddenly appeared and grab him and put him in these elaborate robes and put him on a throne and give him all this lavish attention and give him a feast. And he can remember just being so confused by it. But it turned out he was a reincarnation of a lama. And these were the previous lives' disciples coming to find their master again.
Right.
So a lot of pressure for a 4-year-old.
That is, yes.
He talks about how in his early years, he was 7 or 8, he had these recurring visions. There were dreams and sometimes flashes he would get where he was riding inside a really loud giant beast. And ahead of him, he would see red glowing eyes. And in his mind, he thought, I'm inside some kind of angry tiger or something. He couldn't understand what it was. And it wasn't until years later when he was, in his 20s, the Chinese started turning up. And they came with their trucks. They came with their cars. And when he finally rode in a car, he realized that was the beast from his visions, the noise of the engine. And in front of him, when they were driving, was a truck, and he was seeing the red taillights of the truck.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he always had this premonition, but he just didn't have the concept or the language to describe the experience. So he details his upbringing. He talks about his training, his various masters, ultimately his escape from Tibet and how he ended up in Italy, of all places. And again, it's this fascinating life story full of explanations on the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism and specifically this Dzogchen practice. But I won't go into any of that stuff. Of course, I was just looking for the tales of the terma, these spiritual treasures, and the tertan, the treasure finders that would locate them. He eventually gets to these tales while revealing some interesting characters and other strange practices along the way. One of them is Adzam Rugba, who also, he practiced Dzogchen, but also Cho. I think it's pronounced Cho. It's C-H-O-D, but again, the D's are silent, so I'm just going to go with Cho. Essentially, Cho translates to cutting the ego. And the practitioners, they're usually nomadic. They'll go from place to place. They don't have many possessions. They just have like a couple of instruments, like a bell, a bone trumpet, and a tent. Beg for food, like hardcore living life on the road. And what they do to practice is they go to the loneliest, most desolate places like caves, mountain peaks, but particularly graveyards, forbidden grounds, burial grounds is where they go. And the idea is that there's a terrifying energy in these places, and it intensifies the sensations of the practitioner who, while they're seated alone in this mass grave, he starts to summon all those to whom he owes a karmic debt. Now, this might be, according to the practice, Buddhas or illuminated beings, higher entities, and he offers them. The idea is that he transfers his energy into some nectar and kind of offers it to them. But also what's summoned are demons, evil spirits. And he's kind of, the offering in that case is the body. Like you're offering your body up to a demon to be consumed. So it's
consumed or to be possessed?
Consumed.
Okay.
So remember, it's like cutting the ego. So you have to be willing to give up everything, including your physical body.
Well, we said it was hardcore.
So yeah, it's like this ultimate test of letting go of everything material. And this Cho practitioner, he accompanied Chokyal, the author of this book, Chokyal Namkhai Norbu. He accompanied his uncle Togden to a cave where Togden was going to do this, traditional retreat in this cave, spend a year meditating in there. But instead of taking the direct path, this Cho master who fights demons took him along a really long route, and along the way taught him the essence of this practice of how to take this kind of turbo path and challenge all these internal demons and give up all attachments. And it seems to have worked because according to the author, he says, look, my uncle stayed for several years in this cave. Didn't leave. People brought him supplies, but he basically sat there and meditated for 3 years or something. But when he finally left, he had developed remarkable powers that led people to give him the name or the title of Togden, which means accomplished yogi. And he continued to make these frequent retreats, but he would also start traveling from place to place. And his wanderings came to the attention of the Chinese Communist Party.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, because when he basically left this cave and started wandering about, they were starting to take over Tibet by force, violent force. And they arrested him because they saw this, weird guy wandering about in kind of robes and everything. And because of the way he was as an individual, he couldn't give them an answer that would satisfy them. They'd be like, what do you mean you've been in a cave for 3 years? What do you mean you just wander around?
It would be a concept that they couldn't grasp.
So they basically thought he's a spy.
Yeah.
Like this guy's a spy. He's trying to get information. So they ordered his execution. And despite several attempts to kill him by firing squad, it was impossible. They couldn't kill him. Like that, the communists would have all these people lined up, they'd shoot him in the back of the head, and Togden would just be still kneeling there, It's like they couldn't kill the guy. And
why? Because, hang on a second, would you mean that the bullets would just pass through him, bounce off him?
The bullets just wouldn't, the gun wouldn't work, or they'd shoot the ground past him. It was almost like the bullets were going through him. And eventually they went through, according to the historical accounts, they went through, 3 or 4 of these firing squads, and they basically just gave up. They had to let him go because they couldn't kill him. And
I'm surprised, though, that they didn't take him prisoner and would have performed experiments or something. I mean, if you've shot a guy numerous times and he hasn't died or seemingly had any injuries from it, I would have thought that they would have wanted to understand that.
Maybe no one wanted the responsibility.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, let's just say we got rid of this guy and we'll just let him go.
Yeah.
And off he goes into the mountains. So he basically became a lama. He became a teacher. And it's interesting because the author, Chokyal, he's talking about his ancestors and his family members. So these guys were his 2 uncles. His other uncle was Khyentse Chokyi Wanchung, and these damn names. And it was Khyentse who was one of the skilled treasure hunters. He was one of these legendary Tertons. Now, Chokyal shares how he became a messenger for his uncle in a strange way. Now, this happened when he was really young. He said he went to stay in a cave that was close by to his uncle. It was kind of below his uncle's house or his uncle's cave. And while he was there, he had this really strange dream where a Dakini appeared to him. Remember, a Dakini is like a female goddess. And this Dakini gives him this small scroll of paper. And again, it's got this sacred text written on it, all rolled up. She explains to him in the dream that the text is really important, and when he wakes up, he's got to give it to his uncle. So he remembers, and in his practice, even though he was a young man, he had mastered the ability to be conscious in dreams.
Right.
So lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
And in the dream, even though he knew he was dreaming, he closed one of his fists around the scroll, grabs it. And in the dream, he grabs his other hand and closes that around his fist. So he's kind of holding it in this position. And when he wakes up at dawn, he finds his fists still in this position. And they're tightly clenched. And when he opens up his hands, there's a tiny little scroll in there. And he thinks, oh my God, it wasn't a dream. There's actually a scroll here. So he quickly rushes to his uncle's cave and, knocks on the door and is desperate to explain to him this incredible experience of this heavenly scroll delivered to his palms to give to his uncle. And his uncle just opens the door, like still in his dressing gown, basically says, I've been expecting this. What took so long? Takes it and shuts the door in his face. He was expecting it. It was delayed message.
But hang on, he's just had this incredible experience where he's taken something physical from the dream state. It would be just beyond comprehension, and yet he's just like, I needed that.
His uncle's like, I've been waiting for this.
So does he know that his uncle has special abilities? Obviously not.
Well, obviously now he figures it out.
Now he does.
So the story that was mentioned in Bruce Fenton's new book, Exogenesis, was this one. This is the same uncle he's talking about. And this uncle, in his cave, he had this vision of where a terma, a hidden text or object, would be discovered. And he came to the author of this book, Chokyal, his nephew, and basically said, look, I kind of need your advice. I had this vision of where we can find this sacred object, but I'm not sure about how we should go about it. He said, do you think we should just go there on our own and do it quietly, or do you think we should let more people know? And Chokyal thought about it and said, look, uncle, I think if we let everyone know, when we find it, people will have faith. And they'll want to, practice the Dharma as well. They'll want to become Buddhists as well. So let's tell everyone. Let's tell the entire village. So his uncle agrees, and that's what they do. They put up posters and go and tell the heads of whatever that they're going to find this sacred object. So when the day comes around, there's a large crowd of people. And the place that his uncle had a vision of was high up on the side of this mountain. And because he was enormously fat, he had to be carried by 4 men to get up there, which is probably why he suggested to his nephew, do you think maybe we should get more people involved? Kind of a hike to get up there.
It's probably part of it.
Maybe slip in that they might be able to carry me up there. So he gets carried up the mountain. And when they had arrived and got close enough, the uncle just points to this smooth side of the cliff. And it's just rock. It's nothing there. It's not like a cave or anything. It's just a smooth, sheer cliff face. But he says that's where it is. So, his nephew, Chokyal, says, all right, well, let's organize some of the men. And they basically get a ladder. They send this young guy up there. And his uncle keeps saying, it's in there. That's where it is. So this guy takes up a little ice pick and he climbs up and he's just standing there in front of this rock. He's like, there's nothing here. It's just rock. And the uncle says, start chipping. So he starts chipping away and this weird powder starts coming off the rock face. And it's like fake rock. And they can't explain how it works because it looks seamless. It's not like plaster. This weird powder starts to fall away. And there's this cavity inside the mountain. And this guy can't believe what he's seeing. This cavity is full of this strange sand that looks pristine. And they tell him to, remove some of the sand. There must be something in there. And he starts removing the sand. And he yells back down the ladder and says, there's something in here. There's some kind of object. Now the uncle says, don't touch it. Whatever you do, don't touch it. And what he does is he produces this white cloth and sends Chokyal up the ladder. So Chokyal takes this cloth up and he gives his nephew instructions. I don't know if you've seen the extended edition of the second Lord of the Rings movie. Maybe
I've never seen a Lord of the Rings movie.
Okay, you're wasted on this.
Completely lost on it, but keep going.
The 99.99% of the rest of the world that have seen it. In the extended edition, there's this orb that Sauron has to talk to Sauron the Dark Lord, right? Aaron's like, what? And essentially, one of the young hobbits tries to pick it up, but Gandalf the wizard, grabs it off and says, you can't touch that. And to pick it up, he uses a bag because the object is so powerful. You don't want to hold it. You don't even want to look at it. You don't want to gaze into it.
Right, okay.
Because of its power. Yeah. Like an average person can't handle it.
It's like opening the Ark in Indiana Jones.
Basically, yeah. So he sends his nephew up, Chokyal, and Chokyal has this, he gives him this kind of towel, and he has to kind of look away, reach in and grab this object. Now, he brings it back down to the uncle, and the uncle can see it's this smooth, round, glowing white sphere. They have no idea what it's made of. They've never seen anything like it before, and it's emitting some kind of strange light. And the uncle, he basically wraps it up. He knows it's some kind of object of power. He takes it back to the village and locks it almost like in a Dybbuk box in this giant kind of, like an ark, like a sealed container, lined with lead, and knows this is an object of great power. Now, it's about the size of a grapefruit, this thing. Now, this is why the author Fenton believed it was maybe some kind of alien artifact, because he was linking it to sightings of Foo Fighters and sightings of orbs and the connection to UFOs.
Which I can see why he would make that connection. I can see, but I don't think it's that.
No, I think it's too much of a leap to make, because every other instance of these objects that are found, it's some kind of spiritual object.
Yeah.
All right, it's some kind of heavenly thing that's been passed down from a higher being, and its purpose is to restore faith in the particular practice or advance the particular practice.
Yeah, I mean the problem that I have with that as well is I don't know if that is an answer either. I mean it's it just depends on where you're coming from, I suppose. But I get it, like, because if you're seeing it from a religious standpoint, you can kind of go, well, that that kind of makes sense. But then also from an alien perspective, it's like Prometheus, this kind of idea, ancient aliens kind of idea, that, we see them as gods, but we only see them as gods because their technology is so advanced that's why we interpret it that way. Fair
enough. I'll give you some more information in a moment, which kind of backs up why I don't think it's anything technological in that sense.
Great.
But basically it disappears. He puts it in this box, seals it up with a wax seal, and years later he opens it up and it's gone. The seal hasn't been broken. So he's convinced that the time wasn't ripe for its discovery, and it's been sealed back in some kind of, other cavity to be discovered at a future date. So there's quite a few stories he shares about this particular uncle. He said after this, he basically became like a master as well. He lived on the mountain and would, accept disciples. But he shared this other story I thought was worth mentioning. When he was young, he remembers this really strange master that he came across. And his activities were kind of, you couldn't tell what the guy was doing. He was very, very strange. And this strange, crazy man story was he was originally a monk in the Sakyapa monastery in Tibet. And that monastery had really strict rules. But this particular guy, he had broken the rules in a serious way by having relations with a lady. And he was expelled from the monastery. Now, he felt really bad about what had happened, so he went really far away. But apparently on his travels, this guy who had committed this sin met some masters, received some teachings, and became a serious practitioner. He then returned to his native village where this monastery was, but the monastery still wouldn't take him back. They wouldn't forgive him for what he had done. So his relatives built him his own little retreat on the mountainside, and he basically lived there for several years, and he was known as the practitioner. Now, after a few quiet years, something happened. The guy snapped. He went crazy. One afternoon, he just threw all his books out the window. He burned everything, smashed up all his statues, turned everything upside down, and partly destroyed his house that they'd built for him. And people started to call him the lunatic. Then he disappeared. He just completely vanished. No one saw him for 3 years. And at the end of that time, finally someone came across the guy by chance. And he had chosen this incredibly remote spot to live right at the top of one of the mountains. And everyone was wondering how on earth he had survived because there was literally nothing up there. Rock and snow. That's it. Nothing grew. There was no vegetables. There was no trade routes. There was no way he could have lived up there. Like, it was just bizarre. And because he'd been up there for so long, people started to think he might not be a lunatic. He might be some kind of saint. Now, whenever people tried to talk to him, he refused contact. But still, because he is living this way, they thought he must have discovered something. So Chokyal's uncle, who had found this treasure hunter, he had heard about this story and decided to visit him. So he ended up taking Chokyal and a couple of other people. It took them 15 days on horseback to finally get to this village below the mountain where this crazy guy was. And while they were there, they met a bunch of people who were like, don't go up there. He's crazy. He's got vicious dogs. He'll set them on. Just don't go up there. He's insane. So they were actually quite scared, but they thought, no, this is a test. We have to go up and see. Maybe he's a great master and he can pass on this knowledge. So basically they climb up this mountain. They almost reach the top and they can hear this kind of muttering on the wind, like a fucking God is love.
Is he opening up other people's mail?
Yeah, they get up, they just hear this crazy muttering on the wind. And when they finally arrive, they see probably the shittest house they've ever seen. It's like, imagine Yoda's house in Star Wars, but 3 times smaller, just made of rocks cobbled together. It's like a little retarded igloo. And this is where this crazy guy lives. It's just a tiny little hut. And as they get closer, they can hear him muttering inside again. Fucking Valentine. God is love. And they're thinking, who is this guy talking to? It sounds like he's having some crazy conversation. And the crazy guy inside, he turns and he can see them approaching, and he immediately pulls a blanket over his head and tries to sleep, like pretends he's sleeping. Now, they just thought, Chokyal says, he actually did seem a bit crazy. Maybe we shouldn't be here. Maybe he's just a crazy old man. But as they got closer, they waited a few minutes, and he finally pulled back the blanket and just stared at them through his little crappy igloo window. And Chokyal said he had these enormous bloodshot eyes staring back. His hair was like crazy all over the place. And Chokyal said, I found him terrifying. And he started to speak, but it wasn't in any language they could understand. He was basically like, just basically looking at him, looking at each other, saying, what is this guy trying to say? It obviously wasn't Tibetan. He went on like this for 5 minutes, just muttering at them. And the only thing they could get out of what he was saying was a couple of lines, like in the middle of the mountains, and he said valley and something else. They just couldn't figure out what he was saying. It was obviously some kind of weird babble. Now, still, though, Chokyal's uncle thought he must be a great master who's testing us. I'm going to go inside and give him some gifts. So Chokyal's uncle, climbs in and, on his all fours, climbs into this tiny igloo. And the hut was tiny, obviously. And he had brought some sweets with him as offerings. And he offers one to this crazy master. It's like a little butterscotch or something. The master takes it and puts it in this pot by his side. And then he kind of sits there for a minute and then looks at the uncle and goes, "Oh, a visitor. Would you like a gift?" Reaches inside the pot, pulls out the sweet that he just got from him and offers it to him as a gift. And the uncle's like, no, I just gave that to you. So he's basically sitting there thinking, what the hell do I do? Like, is this master testing me? Is he just some crazy man? Until finally he speaks. And the master goes, you have finally come. I have a heavenly scroll to give you. Knowledge passed down from thousands of years. And he reaches into his dirty, filthy jacket covered in crap and pulls out this scroll. And with two hands, he hands it to Chokyal's uncle. Chokyal's uncle bows and then takes this holy scroll and says, "Thank you, master," and kind of crawls out of the hut.
Does he unfurl it and it's like smeared with poop? Is that
when he gets outside and back in the snow, he's like, he's a master who gave me this scroll, but he looks closer. And it's not a scroll anymore. It's the guy's dirty snot tissue.
That's close.
It's his hanky, and it's just covered in boogers. Like, it's just covered in filthy green snot.
Well, some kind of excrement. I was close.
So the uncle just turns to Chokyal, who, again, is just a kid. He's like in his early 20s, and he just says, this is probably a test. You go inside and talk to him. So Chokyal's shitting himself. He's like, what is this guy going to do to me? So he goes inside and he has a gift of biscuits to give to the master. And he shows the master the biscuits and the master's just like, huh? He doesn't really understand what it is. So he opens the packet. He says, "See, look, biscuit. Eat good." And like hands him the biscuit. And this master just grabs it and goes, boom, and puts it in the pot.
Biscuit.
Now, at this stage, Chokyal gets a chance to look inside the pot. And inside the pot is a little bit of water. There's some tobacco, some peppers, his uncle's sweet that he gave him earlier, and his biscuit. And he looks around the weird igloo, and again, he's like, how does this guy survive? Because there's no kitchen in there. One of the two pots he has, obviously this isn't for cooking. He just puts his weird crazy trinkets in there. There's no food. There's nothing. How is this guy surviving up here? Just can't make any sense of it. So finally, there's this weird, awkward pause. He stays a little bit longer, wondering what the hell's going to happen. And eventually the master goes, "I have gift for you. Very important, ancient artifact. You take this, you unlock Buddha's wisdom." And he gives him this shining golden pot and hands it to him. And Chokyal says, "Oh, thank you, master." Thank you, bows and takes it, kind of backs out of the weird igloo. And he says to his uncle, "He gave me this golden pot from, it's a Buddha artifact. It's amazing." And they look at it and it's not a golden pot. It's a earthenware pot that he uses to piss in.
There we go.
And it's full of his piss. And again, they're just standing there in the snow in the freezing cold on the top of this mountain, and they just hear this. He starts babbling at him again. They got no idea what's going on. And he finishes this crazy rant, the crazy master. He sticks his head out the igloo, and he basically says in Tibetan, "Piss off this way." And he points in this particular direction. Very specifically say, "Piss off this way." Now, Chokyal's uncle and Chokyal, they're just standing there going, oh, this is crazy. We better listen to this guy. We just better get the hell out of here. So even though it's not the right way to go, they keep hiking
in that direction,
down the mountain in the direction this crazy old man has pointed them in. And as they're walking, it's maybe half an hour, and it's really hard, and they don't know why they're going this way, and they're kind of a bit lost themselves. It's getting dark, and they hear this kind of crying on the wind. They hear this, oh, help me. And as they get closer to the sound, they realize a local man has fallen off some rocks and fallen like over a little ravine and snapped his ankle. He's broken his foot. He can't move. He's in tremendous pain. It's getting dark. It's getting cold.
And had they not come along, I'm assuming he would have been in great danger?
Yeah, he would have died. So they pick this man up and they take him back to his village, which is ages away. And the man's healed and they survive. And they finally think that maybe this was the test, that the crazy master, that was the final test. Like, he gave us the snot rag, he gave us the pissing pot, and then we had to go rescue this guy. Maybe now when we go back, he'll start making some sense and he'll share with us some of his wisdom. So the next day they hike back to this guy's hut. They prostrate before it.
With the piss pot?
Yeah, with the sacred artifacts. And the crazy man, he sticks his head out and he says, "Fuck off!"
In Tibetan, of course.
In Tibetan. And they're like, well, I guess he's crazy, and they go back down the mountain, and that's the end of that story.
Are you kidding me? That's it? That's it?
So the funny thing about it is he's like, maybe in the book, Chokyal says maybe he was a crazy old man, but he was probably teaching entities on a higher plane, and that's why we couldn't understand him.
Don't make excuses. But you got done by a crazy old man.
I love these stories of the crazy Tibetan master.
Well, I was going to say, though, isn't that really common, though? There's so much of that. They're crazy. Like, they are on the fringes of society, but it's done because, in a way, it's its own practice. It's like the shock value forces people out of their, I don't know, is it their thought patterns? You know, it's allowing people to break into a new level. Yeah,
that sort of stuff. There's a ton of great stories about Changchub Dorje, who was one of his masters. He was a healer, like he was a doctor, but it was always said that he had these miraculous abilities. He could always have far sight. He could read people's thoughts. He could teleport objects. And he tells a story about this well-off patient who was healed by Dorje, who sent a servant to give a gift to the master to say, thanks for healing me. And this servant, he set out on horseback and he had this gift. And it was basically a big parcel of tea, a bunch of packets of tea wrapped up with a string. And along the way, this servant, he got a bit greedy and he stopped one night because it was like a 2-day journey. And he opened the packet of tea and he took out a third of it. And he thought, the master's not going to know that I've taken this tea. I'll just, take some for myself and seal it back up. And that's what he did. So he pulled out his knife, he cut the package and took the tea. So Chokyal, who wrote this book, he was actually at the master's house, not knowing that this, servant with the gift was coming, obviously. And all of a sudden, the master, right out of the blue, just says, "Wife, prepare a meal. We've got a visitor coming." And she's like, "Oh, okay, honey," because, he had this reputation of knowing when people were going to show up. And he's requesting that it's a lavish, formal meal. Like everything needs to be laid out perfectly, the best cutlery, the best plates. And it was unusual because they set up the guest spot away from the main place where they eat, which usually means it's someone really important that's coming. And he had a specific instruction to his wife. He says, our guest is going to have the best food, but he won't need a knife. Don't leave a knife out for him. And she's like, okay, whatever you say. And she, prepares this meal. And when this servant messenger finally arrives, Chokyal's there. He's like, I wonder what's going to happen. So this servant, he comes in with the gift. He greets the master with great respect and he gives him this parcel and says, oh, this is from, my benefactor. And he says, thanks for healing me. He's given you all this tea. And Dorje thanks him and says, he's very polite, says, thank you. You've done a great deed and I'll open it later. And he asks this messenger if he's hungry. The messenger says, yeah, I'm ravished. So he sits him down and he he shows him this incredible feast they've prepared for him. So that it's lavish, like the best meal he's ever had in his life. So he sits down and he just starts hoeing into these courses. And it finally gets to the meat course and the servant realizes that there's no knife on his table. So he reaches into his scabbard to pull out his knife, and he's going through his folded clothes and he can't find his knife. He's like, where's my knife? And the master just looks at him and says, it's no good looking for your knife, my friend. You left it on the boulder beside the road 2 nights ago when you used it to open my parcel and stole 1/3 of my tea. Bitch. And so no one tried to ever hold one over this guy ever again. Word got around. Like, this guy got severely punished. You just couldn't lie to this guy because he knew every time if you were trying to pull a fast one over him. So there's a bunch of stories like that. No one dared deceive the guy. There's a bunch of stories of masters dying like Jedis. Have you heard this?
No.
So the master of this guy, the guy who found the thief's knife or revealed the thief.
Did he get thrown by his protege into a Star Wars hole?
No, his master, he doesn't mention his name. There it is, Gana Puja. He had this way of, essentially he knew when he was going to die, but he had developed this thing they call the body of light. And essentially it's a way to go beyond the 3 realms in Buddhist terminology. And basically he said to his disciples, all right, about a week, I'm out of here. See you later, suckers. Let's set everything up. So they set up this hut for the master, and all the disciples going, oh, please, not now. He's like, nope, it's my time. I'm out of here. He knows he's going to die. So the disciples, they set up this little tent on the mountain and they seal him up inside. They zip it up and, they say their goodbyes and they leave him at peace. And he says to them, come back in 7 days. So they go back down the mountain and they wait, and there's the usual stuff that happens when a great lama dies, with all this rainbows in the sky and all this weird light activity and strange sounds heard and all this weird stuff. And when they go back, they zip open the tent, and it's like it's like a Jedi that's been killed, because there's just this robe on the ground, his hair, and all his fingernails and toenails.
So
that's it.
All the keratinized tissue essentially is left, but everything else is gone. Like fingernails, hair.
Yeah.
Like hardened keratinized tissue.
It's just, everything else is gone. It's like,
that's weird, because keratin isn't the hardest substance in your body either.
I think the idea is it's the most impure part.
Right, I guess, because it's growing. I don't know, actually. Yeah, I don't know.
So the funny thing about this is there's a handful of stories from Chinese troops during their occupation of Tibet.
No, these are great, because they're not believers in this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
they're experiencing
they'd
it.
essentially put a lama in house arrest, right? And they'd seal up his house. And basically that's, punish you in house arrest, keeping an eye on you. And they'd come back days later, and it's the same thing. There'd just be his clothes, a bunch of hair, and his toenails and fingernails. And that's it. And they would basically go looking for them. They would never find them until the locals said, oh, no, this is actually a thing. Like, some of these achieved practitioners, they've developed this technique where their body just goes somewhere else, and all they leave behind is their hair and their robe and their fingernails. Isn't it weird?
It's strange. Yeah, very much so.
Again, you're just finding all this stuff that George Lucas just steals straight out of these legends.
Well, you have to wonder, though, if this is where they get their ideas. If it has come from reading these old stories.
I think so. So that was The Crystal and the Way of Light, Sutra Tantra and Dzogchen by, what's his name again? Chokyal Namkal Norbu.
You have to go back at the edit, just cut it and paste it there. That will work perfectly.
I'll link to it in the show notes. It's full of descriptions of the practice.
Yes,
so if you're interested in how they think and how the meditations work and the practices, there's like a yoga thing they do as well. It's worth checking out.
Probably a really foolish question, but do you think, because we don't hear it these days, but do you think these practices still exist? Because I know that Tibet has been, their culture has been decimated by what has happened to them, but do you think there's still pockets of this hidden knowledge which is retained somewhere?
Well, one example of the Cho practice, which I want to mention some more stories of that in a moment, especially the fighting weird demon stuff, is traditionally there was over 100 massive texts on the type of practices, right?
Well, instructional text.
Instructional manuals. Like a giant, you think in Western terms, like a giant book, a 400-page book of all techniques and how to do this particular practice. There was hundreds of these. Today, there's only 8 that remain.
That we know of.
Well, that we have access to. I'm not saying that they've hidden them away, although there's an idea that they might have hidden them in Tibet as the communists were coming.
Yeah.
But that's how many the communists destroyed. That's what I'm saying. They destroyed it. So there's only 8 remaining. All the other knowledge has been lost. So when the Chinese communists came in, they said, for every scripture you have, someone dies. So if you had 3 books in your house,
3 people would die.
3 people in your family, they would kill.
Yep.
So the people were so scared, they just burnt the books themselves.
Yep.
What choice did they have?
Of course, nothing.
So the communists coming in, like everything, every time they do this, everything's destroyed. The whole culture is decimated. Thousands and thousands of years of tradition and practice obliterated in the blink of an eye. It's really horrible. But, as I was looking for more of these stories, one of the commenters on the Crystal and the Way of Light book said, that's pretty good, but the best one is by Urgyen Rinpoche called Blazing Splendor. So I thought, okay, I've got to check this out. So this guy did the same practice as Chokyal. He did Dzogchen and the Turbo Path. And Daniel Goleman wrote in the introduction saying, like the Dalai Lama, a tulku or reincarnate master, Urgyen was among the most renowned and influential modern teachers in Dzogchen, this tradition. He was really instrumental in first bringing this now popular practice to the West. And the whole story is about his memoirs, this journey through a lost culture. We become familiar with him and his homeland and what it was like before the communists came through. And it really was this land of spiritual richness. That's how people describe it, because everyone from shepherds to kings were dedicated practitioners. And when you read his stories, it really is amazing. It's like, you go to the baker and the baker would be like, oh, hang on a second, I've just got to finish my meditation. They would be practicing deep breathing while they were cutting their bread. You'd go to the butcher and they would be a practitioner as well. They'd be doing some kind of focused practice while they're chopping their meat. Like everyone was practicing. He says when he was a kid, when you'd play games in the street with your friends, the games were, let's build a monastery out of rocks. And then another game they would play is, hey, let's pretend to be lamas and meditate. That's how they were raised. That was normal life. Everyone wanted to do the practice.
Not anymore.
So yeah, obviously all that was destroyed. But it's a fantastic thing to read if you want to hear the history of Buddhism. He goes into all those crazy tales of scriptures coming down on the top of the king's palace that I mentioned earlier. He talks about the story of Milarepa. Have I talked about Milarepa on the show before? I'm not sure if I've mentioned it.
The name is really familiar, so maybe you have. I can't.
Milarepa is insane. It's such a crazy, wild story. It's so fun. Basically, this young guy growing up in Tibet, wasn't a practitioner of sorts, but his father was very rich, had like tons of cattle and, lots of land. But his father died and his evil uncle and auntie swindled his mother out of the property and basically took over, stole his inheritance. And he suffered tremendously under it's kind of like a Disney film. He's got this evil auntie ruining his life. And just before she passed away, his mother comes to him and says, son, you must go up the mountain to seek the Dharma. And he's like, what do you mean, Mum? Do you want me to become a monk and, follow the heavenly path? And she's like, no. I want you to get revenge. You have to get revenge and kill my sister. And he's like, all right. So she gives him this gem she's been keeping secret for like 20 years and hands it to him. He goes up the mountain in search of this Tulku master. And he finds this master that's kind of famous but doesn't take many disciples. But then he shows this master this gem. And the master's like, all right, I'll teach you. And he basically, within 3 years or something, he learns how to control thunder and lightning. The story's amazing. Like he stands up on this mountain and starts causing floods to destroy his enemies. He, ravages his uncle's village and destroys everything. and basically comes down as he becomes a Sith Lord. Like, he comes down with his red lightsabers and says, he's like, "Mother, I have mastered the dark arts. We have revenge." And his mother's been, I think from the story, his mother's killed by something he did, right? Some flood or something. And he's like, "No."
All right. So this plays into what I'm going to be talking about in the plus extension of intention. And even if you have, well, I would say it's good intention there, but even if you have the intention of achieving some type of outcome, it often can have negative consequences that you don't anticipate.
Yeah. And from here, from my memory of the story, he realizes that he's now a Sith Lord, but he wants to go the other way. He wants to turn away from the dark side. So he seeks out this other master, and this other master is well renowned. He has all these disciples, and he sees Milarepa coming and basically says, "Look, I'll take you on as a disciple if you listen to everything I say. You're not allowed to question me. You have to do everything I tell you to do." So Milarepa's like, "Fine, I'll do it. How hard can it be?" So he says, "You see that stone house over there? I want you to pull it apart and move it over on the other side of the valley." And he has to do it all by himself. And it's this massive stone house, like hundreds of pieces of very heavy stone. And he does it. No, he takes it apart by hand and he puts it on his back, and he's got horrible welts from carrying the stone. He works like 15 hours a day. You know, it takes him months to rebuild this house where this master wants it. And the master's like, finally sees it finished and goes and checks out the house. And Milarepa's like, "Oh, finally, can I be your disciple? I've built this house. It's the hardest thing I've ever done." The master just goes, "Yeah, you know what? I don't like this spot. I want it built back where you got it." So he's like, "You got to be kidding me." He says, "No, you have to do everything I said." And this happens 5 times. He moves this stone house. It takes him like 10 years to do this. And like, he's completely destroyed physically. He can barely move. He's got, welts and bruises, and he's got a hunchback. And finally, this master accepts him as a disciple, and he learns this practice. It's definitely worth checking out with all the weirdness that follows, because he meditates in this cave for years, and he doesn't eat or drink anything. And one day he comes out of this deep meditation and he looks down and he can see his spine.
Oh, from the front.
Through his stomach. Oh. Like, not with his third eye open or anything, but he can see the bones. Yeah. That's how skinny he is. And he's like, "Oh, maybe I should have a nibble of something to eat." Now, the only thing that's around is nettle, like green nettle, weeds. So he has a pot and he makes this, that's all he eats is nettle. And then he just goes back into this deep meditation. Now, the meditation is keeping him alive, but he has this nettle soup to sustain himself. He needs something else. And eventually he turns green. He just becomes this hideous green freak. He's like the Hulk, but skinny. And, people come up to the mountain and sometimes they see him. Like, travelers will see this green monster in this cave and think it's some kind of demon, but it's just Milarepa who's been eating nettle.
But it sounds like he's been led astray. I mean, what's the whole point of this?
Well, he's letting go of all his attachments. He's obtaining higher spiritual paths, and he's actually, he describes in his meditation everything he's perceiving, and it's like miraculous. But here in the physical world, he's barely hanging on, right? Eventually he unlocks some ability, and he's like, "I'm kind of bored sitting in the cave," and he starts flying around the countryside, like literally like Superman. So this is only within the first kind of couple of chapters of his story, but you've basically got all these farmers freaking out because they're seeing a weird green skeleton man flying through the sky who smells of nettle, and then all these people see him. It's totally bizarre. This book is full of anecdotes about Milarepa. Like, one of his disciples, before he said his final goodbye to him, he lifted up his skirt, like his robes, and showed his disciple his butt. He was like, "See this?" And the disciple looks, and he's so skinny, you can see his bones through his butt. And he says to his disciple, "Listen to me. It was by sitting on these buttocks that I attained realization." He says, easy, comfortable practice will get you nowhere. Because he's so worn and screwed up. The message is you got to work hard. You can't just have a life of comfort and expect to be a flying green skeleton man.
No, well, most people get that though. But I mean, really, having the ability to fly is appealing. But if you've got to be a flying green skeleton to do it, I don't know.
It's got the tale of the butter man and his 1,000 curries.
Well, we have to go into that in the plus extension, Ben.
I'll quickly tell this, and then I'm obviously rambling too long. We'll cut it and go into the plus extension, because this is the story of Lume Dorje. It's actually one of the author's ancestors. And according to the historical accounts, he was a famous lama, right? And he arrives at this village, and word gets around that he's there, and all the devotees, they want to come and shower him with gifts and get blessed and all the usual stuff. But this local village, they had this particular dish they were famous for, and it was this really rich, like creamy butter curry. And it was just like 90% butter with a bit of root vegetable in there.
Oh, no. I think I know where this is going.
And so some young lady would come and say, oh, master, here's a butter curry for you. And he would say thank you, and he'd eat it right in front of her. And she'd say, oh, many blessings. And she would move on. Then another woman would come up, oh, master, here's a butter curry for you. And he'd eat it. And then they'd go on. And by the end of the day, according to the eyewitness reports, he'd eaten hundreds of these butter curries. Like his stomach was expanding.
Please don't tell me it's coming out of his butt like a soft serve machine.
And by the end of the day, all the other monks that were with him was like, oh, master's lost the plot. He's going to die. Like no one can eat this much butter curry and not die. It was just, no one had seen anything like it. And they were all worried.
It's a lethal dose of butter curry.
Yeah, they were all worried he wasn't going to survive the night, because it was just ridiculous. And the next morning, everyone came out like expecting him to be dead. But instead, he's just sitting there in this meditation position, and all this butter starts coming out of his pores.
Ew.
And it starts coming out and
congealing.
Getting thicker and thicker and congealing. And over time, these layers form, and it starts glowing. Like the butter is glowing, and it smells like a butter curry.
Is this a butter tulpa?
And there's just
a butter ganger,
a glistening glazed butter man sitting there in full lotus position with like rays of light coming off his butter body. And the whole village realizes this is a true bodiless Vajra. He has obtained enlightenment. He is some kind of butter god. So from then on, he was known as the butter man.
So it would have been better if he stepped out of it. Like he's created a secondary body that is just a butter man. He just steps back and a copy of him.
And then baked that into some kind of treat.
Yeah, the delicious. It's served to the townsfolk.
And then ate that. But yeah, he essentially became a sublime being. So I realize I have a ton more of these stories than I first thought. So let's shovel some of this into the plus extension. I got
delightfully put. What to shovel it in.
I've got a ton of amazing stuff coming up. I have more stories of these bizarre treasures that are concealed in hidden places.
Oh, cool.
And specifically the description of how these bizarre cavities open. And it says it's like an anus of a cow. That's how they describe it. It's like the rock just goes like a cow's anus. You know how a cow's anus opens.
Yeah, I mean, do you get like one of those veterinarian's gloves that goes all the way down your arm? You can just reach in.
Yeah,
right,
so the hero, the treasure finder, will reach in, move around a bit, and pull out the treasure. And that's the weird thing, which links this to why I think this is not some kind of alien technology and why this is closer to a spiritual item.
Okay.
Is because this has many crossings over with items that are apported during poltergeist activities.
Oh.
Specifically the type of energy and residue that's left on the items.
Well, we got a hint of that when, they went to open that sealed box and there was nothing in there. It seemed to me that it was apported. I mean, I guess if you're looking at it from the alien technology point of view, you could say it was teleported.
Yes.
But no, you're right. I didn't think of it that way, that, this apportings seem to have more of a spiritual aspect to them.
And, of course, the story I finish with is the great master whose assistant died and he reanimated his corpse to carry his suitcase over the Himalayas.
Well, that's a very important story that we have to get through. I've got a story of a guy whose essential doppelganger gets him through a very difficult situation. Saves him.
Really?
Yep, gets him through a snowbank and all ends well. But all will be revealed in the Plus extension, as well as I'm going to go into this great book by Larry Dossey. Now, Larry Dossey wrote a book that I touched on many, many years ago. It's called Healing Words, The Power of Prayer and the Practice of Medicine. And he's got this new book, which is called Be Careful What You Pray For. You might just get it. What we can do about the unintentional effects of our thoughts, prayers, and wishes. And in reality, that's far too long. The title actually should have just simply been Toxic Prayer. And I was reading that apparently that was the intention for what the book was supposed to be called, was Toxic Prayer. But the publisher's like, that's a little bit...
oh, really?
A little bit dangerous. Let's just call it Be Careful What You Pray For. But what this is I thought, I was like, oh, come on, prayer, I don't want to go into that. But then I realized it's not actually about, religious prayer, as I said, is part of it. But it's more about the intention that you put into the world. It's like this, a version of The Secret, I suppose. And it really is this concept. at the very, very core, or the very basis of what this is, it's that your thoughts actually have a physical substance to them.
Oh, wow.
That your thoughts actually can alter reality. And sometimes in very unintentional ways, in ways that you may be trying to help someone, but ultimately like thoughts and prayers and sending well wishes and that kind of stuff, sometimes can have, we don't realize, but actually can have this very selfish attribute to them, which will all be explained when I talk about it in the Plus extension.
Oh, looking forward to that. That's all on Plus. Head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus for all the details. Gets you the big extensions to these shows every single Friday. And if you're a Plus member, you get exclusive access to the season that comes out on Tuesdays. There's a concurrently running season exclusive to members. You also get a higher bitrate feed as well, so a higher quality audio version of the show exclusive to Plus.
Extra bass.
It does have extra bass.
Extra bass.
Extra bass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I won a pair
Works
of
for Sony
headphones this week, and its main feature is extra bass. So we just started wondering about all the things in our life that could have extra bass.
It does make life much better. Anything, just extra bass. Turn it right up.
It doesn't have extra bass, but you will get a totally ad-free version of the show if you're on Plus. You get the discounts off digital products in our store. All the good stuff is available to our Plus members. Perfect time to sign up as well, as we're heading into our break. This is the last show, the last episode of season 23. Again, we'll be back for Plus members on the 30th of June, and we'll return with the regular MU season on the 3rd of July. That's a wrap. Thanks for listening. Thanks for another great season. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll see you on the 3rd. Welcome back to your Plus